Bhagavatam classes every day in Dublin. So far we have only 2 classes a week, one by Sanatan Govindadas Prabhu on Mondays, and on Tuesdays I am taking up the mantle. The goal is to have class every day on Bhagavatam in Dublin. Eventually to have obviously live classes and people can attend them as well physically when this coronavirus episode is over. Ultimately so that we can have a centre where we meet and discuss Bhagavatam, live Bhagavatam, and live near where Bhagavatam is spoken. So by Krishna's grace, that will be a reality in the future, and then we can actually expand from there. But the hearing and the chanting and the discussion on Bhagavatam is very important for every city. So we're on verse 5 today, and it is the birth of Emperor Parikshit. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 12, Text number 5, the birth of Emperor Parikshit. Sampada Ktavoloka Mahishi Umbrataro Mahi Jambudvipa Dipatyamcha Yashascha Tri Divangatam Sampata Ktavaloka Mahishi Brataro Mahi Jambudvip Hipatam Patyamcha Yashascha Tri Divangatam Sampara Kutavoloka Mahishi Brataro Mahi Jambudvipidipatam Techa Yashas Chatri Devam Gatam. Hare Krishna. Sampada, opulence. Kratava, sacrifices. Loka, future destination. Mahishi, the queens. Bratara, the brothers. Mahi, the earth. Jambudvip, the globe or planet of our residence. Adipatyam, sovereignty. Cha, also. Yasha, fame. Cha and Tridivam, celestial panaskatam, spread over. So the translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. News even reached the celestial planets about Maharaj Yudhishthir's worldly possessions, the sacrifices by which he could attain a better destination, his queen, his stalwart brothers, his extensive land, his sovereignty over the planet Earth, and fame, etc. Purport. Only a rich and great man's name and fame are known all over the world, and the name and fame of Maharaj Yudhishthir reached the higher planets because of his good administration, his worldly possessions, glorious wife Draupadi, the strength of his brothers Bhima and Arjuna, and his solid sovereign power over the world, known as Jambudvip. Here the word loka is significant. There are different lokas or higher planets scattered all over the sky, both material and spiritual. A person can reach them by dint of his work in the present life, as stated in Bhagavad Gita 9.25. I'll just read that out actually. 9.25. What is it now? I'll remember it once I get to it. 9.25. Yanti Deva Vatav Devan Pitranyanti Pitvataha Bhutani Yanti Bhuteja Yanti Mam Yaji Nopi Mam. Those who worship the demigods will take birth among the demigods. Those who worship ancestors go to the ancestors. Those who worship ghosts and spirits will take a birth among such beings, and those who worship me will live with me. No forceful entrance is allowed there. The tiny material scientists and engineers who've discovered vehicles to travel over a few thousand miles in outer space will not be allowed entrance. There is no way to reach the better planets. One must qualify himself to enter into such happy planets by sacrifice and service. Those who are sinful in every step cannot expect only to be degraded into animal life, to suffer more and more pangs of material existence. And this is also stated in Bhagavad Gita 16:19. And I'll read that as well. Yeah, I lost the place. 16:19. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna. Tamaham dvishita kruran sanksareshu naradamam. Kshiprajasam asubam asurav ishveva yonishu. Those who are envious and mischievous, who are the lowest among men, I perpetually cast into the ocean of material existence, into various demonic species of life. That's the other side of it. Maharaj Yudhishthira, good sacrifices and qualification were so lofty and virtuous that even the residents of the higher celestial planets were already prepared to receive him as one of them. Amiganati Mirandasha Jana Jana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militamyana Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. We're talking about here about Maharaj Yudhishthira. He is an ideal king from 5,000 years ago. Maharaj Yudhishthira, we're talking about his good qualities, that he had so many good qualities that even the denizens of higher planetary systems wanted to hear about him, or they had heard about him. His name and fame had spread that far. And so therefore what we're talking about here is an ideal situation which was there many thousands of years ago, which the modern mind may find difficult to accept or ascertain or believe in, or whatever word you want to put on it. They will find that difficult, but that's not what we're talking here about, whether the mundane mind is happy or not happy with a specific situation from a spiritual truth. One of the things that is mentioned here is Prabhupada in the purport. He talks about how people are trying to get to higher planets. He said by traveling a few thousand miles. Well, now it's understood that they may have traveled longer than this. This was written in 1961, 62 by Prabhupada. So at that time there wasn't any moon excursions, or at the moment there's so many excursions to Mars. So in the last 60 years, there's been excursions, not a few thousand miles, but a few 100,000 miles. But the result is the same. There is no, they're coming back with a piece of rock or a piece of stone or some pictures of a barren land. But that's why there is not great credibility to their excursion, because the reality is that you can only reach these places by another system, a different fuel, not petrol or gasoline or whatever you might call it, or whatever they use, and even atomic power. These different powers are, excuse me, let me get some water here. Hare Krishna. These powers are not relevant powers, and they're not. For instance, I'm not going to go out and start going into the earth and trying to mine for some petrol, or even to get some oil and then to transform it into petrol. That's considered to be ugra karma. But what I can do is I can perform some sacrifice and some service to understand the nature of the absolute truth. I can do that. I don't need anything else from anybody else to do that. In fact, anytime I take help from anybody else, it prevents me from doing that, because it makes me a lazy bugger, you know. You find that you get up in the morning and you turn on your light, you turn on your heat. Everything is sort of laid on so that you don't have to do anything, you know. But what is the result of all that? We just become lazy. But not only lazy materially, but we become lazy spiritually. We think everything is provided by the government or by the world. It supplies everything. The earth is to make me happy, to make me comfortable. It's a completely erroneous way of living. So we have to be very adroit and very expert in learning how not to become entangled in this world. It's stated in the Bhagavad Gita that those who are expert at not being entangled are in the mode of goodness. They're careful to what is binding and what is liberating. So that's something which is binding, and that can go on for decades. I have personal experience of being bound for decades with very, I would call them crass and very basic understanding. One basic understanding, for instance, is that if I have my semi-detached house in the suburbs, I can be happy, or I don't have to do anything else. I just go in there and I can be a mole in a house, and go out and work and come back in my happy house. But it's not a happy house. At the point of death, you're dragged from it, So what have I done with my consciousness? So the material world is full of faithlessness. In fact, this is the world in which we're living in. It's trying to take away that. This is Maya. This is called Maya illusion. It's trying to keep us in illusion, the mode of ignorance. But what we're talking about here is Maharaj Yudhishthira, who's the personification of goodness. Another typical situation of the political system that is there today is that it's promising sense gratification, enjoyment for the senses. And, it's said that religion was the opiate of the people. By God, religion is what actually keeps the people alert to the opiate that has been presented by the material governments today. That's actually, what religion does. Religion actually makes one alert, or makes one see the opiate of material civilization. So completely wrong, Mr. Marx, or whatever your name is. Completely wrong. Another mess of an egoistic mess, trying to find a material solution. That's not to say that everything that people of that nature had said was wrong. No, there were certain things that they said was correct also. But the thrust of it is in the wrong direction. And this is why we're presenting a different thrust. And if we go back to yesterday's purport by Prabhupada, Prabhupada quotes himself in the introduction. He says, there is a need for the science of Krishna in human society for all the suffering humanity of the world, and we simply request the leading personalities of all nations to take to the science of Krishna for their own good, for the good of society, and for the good of all people of the world. Now, I'm not entering into the realm of politics as such, but yesterday, former president of France was indicted and for corruption. Of course, he's going to fight it and go to this court and that court and try to make their good name and whatever. But he was in a kind of a cartel trying to, give certain favors to certain people so that his other things that he was doing would be looked favorably by the judiciary. Now, even the people who are making the investigation, I'm not saying that they're that much better than the people they're investigating. I'm not to say that there isn't good or honest people around. I'm not trying to make out that point either, that everyone is corrupt except me and my philosophy. But what we're presenting here is, and what Prabhupada is presenting as leadership, which is for the good of all the living entities, not just for the human beings. I mean, you can see how that is heavily weighted in the world today, that all this oil that is mined, all the rubbish and the waste that is buried in the earth is for the so-called satisfaction of the human species, whereas the other species are totally neglected, except a few dogs in the street, that are worshipped. But every other living entity is considered a pest or an annoyance for the human civilization. So that's what's being presented here, is that the King Yudhishthira, he's meant for all the living entities. He wants to look after every creature that is born here. It is not that the human species should have complete domination over everyone else for the sense gratification of that human. It may have domination from a point of view of intelligence, but that intelligence, the strength of the strong, should be used to protect the weak. That's what the strength is there for. Any strength that is there is coming from God, and any intelligence that is there is coming from God. So strength and intelligence should be used to help all the citizens of the planet, not just the human citizens. So Maharaj Yudhishthira was of this ilk, and so much so that it said in these few verses here that even the denizens in the higher planetary systems are considered him very special. He was very famous. Maybe you have Elon Musk today as a famous person, or Bill Gates or some of those people, because they're rich, so they have some influence and some power. But again, these are reflections of what's going on in higher dimensions. I don't see why that's such a hard concept for people to take, that there is a greater dimension. Plato understood it from the whole point of that there is ideal elements in another greater place. So we had that kind of understanding there. Where did these particular examples come from? For instance, why are there brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, whatever? Where is all of that coming from? Why did that all materialize? How did that all manifest? Any thinking person will see that it is a reflection of something greater. Any non-thinking people will say it happened by chance, And any thinking person will see that will discover within oneself a higher potency than this material potency, which diminishes and which ultimately dies. And that the real happiness in the world is beyond. That is what is attained by the senses. So that is where the real philosophy comes in here. Is that we're servant. That is the nature of the living entity. He's servant of the servant of the servant. But he's ultimately is there to serve God, and it's explained in a later purport that it's explaining God's expansions. Some people this example is used at watering the root of the tree you don't water the tree by watering the leaves. You have to water the root. So this kind of a humanism comes into it, another misconception comes into it that, just by serving humanity, everything will be fine. But what does that mean, serving humanity? It means you give food, you give medical. These are important, but they're not the important thing, because they're not actually feeding the soul. It's like the bird in the cage example. You're feeding the bird by polishing a cage, but that's not feeding the bird inside. You have to feed the bird inside, which is the soul. So Maharaj Yudhishthira understood this, and his whole goal was to bring people back to the reality of the spiritual dimension of who they actually are. And his reign was for that. He controlled the destiny of the world for the prosperity of every living being. That is a phrase from the previous verse. Purport. So we're talking 12, 1, 4 to 6. I'm taking different aspects of those three verses. So he controlled the destiny. He was the leader. So he controlled the destiny for the benefit of the other living entities, not for his own benefit, not for his own sense gratification. That's another big, no for the leaders of today, because they're just ultimately they're enjoying their own sense gratification, or they're following their own material understandings. Like the leaders of today, for instance, the politicians, they don't want to really have anything to do with religion as such, and they can't be seen to have that much to do with religion as such, although in America that of recently times that was grossly misrepresented. But anyway, people think that their own political ideology or their own materialistic view of the world will help them, but it won't, because there is a link between what's going on in the world and there's a higher order of things, and unless we can link with that higher order, what we do in this world will ultimately not be of any benefit to anyone as such. So I think that I want to read here from the purport in text 6. There are two things in this world which can satisfy living beings. When one is materially engrossed, he is satisfied only by sense of gratification. But when one is liberated from the conditions of the material modes, he is satisfied only by rendering loving service for the satisfaction of the Lord. This means that the living being is constitutionally a servitor and not one who is served. Being illusioned by the conditions of the external energy, one falsely thinks himself to be served, but actually he is not served. He is a servant of the senses like lust, desire, anger, avarice, pride, madness, and intolerance. So these are the things that are holding the living entity back, basically. And the living entity has to become free of that. So Maharaj Yudhishthira was an example of somebody who was not living to glorify and gratify his own senses, but he was living to gratify the senses of the Lord. And by, Prabhupada says, an ideal king, he has no personal ambition, and there's no place for sense gratification, because all his senses at all times are engaged in the loving service of the Supreme, which includes, now this is an important point here, which includes partial service to the living entities who form the parts and parcel of the complete whole. So the living entities are parts of God as well. But those who are busy rendering service to the parts and parcel, leaving aside the whole, only spoil time and energy, as one does when watering the leaves of a tree without watering the root. If water is poured on the root, the leaves are enlivened perfectly and automatically. But if water is poured on the leaves only, the whole energy is spoiled. So Maharaj Yudhishthira was therefore constantly engaged in the service of the Lord, And thus the parts and parcels of the Lord, the living entities, under his careful administration, were perfectly attended with all the comforts in this life and all progress in the next. That is the way of perfect management of state administration. So therefore, unless our leaders are engaged in serving God, unless they're constantly absorbed, chanting 16 rounds every day, following the 4 regulative principles, unless they're like that, they're going to be going off astray. They're going to be they'll be deflecting so much of the worship, shall we say, or the followership of the living entities towards following themselves, and becomes personality cults and all sorts of unsavory things. And even you could say in a spiritual organization, you have to be careful of that as well. You can personality cults unless the leaders are actually serving God, I thought it nicely put here. And thus the parts and the living entities under his careful administration, careful administration, and therefore the living entities then in that situation, they will all already get those things automatically. Because the living entities themselves will be servants and their needs will be looked after because the leader is looking after the needs of God. He's serving God. So God is going to come in and help the whole situation. That's when there is peace and harmony in the world situation. So Prabhupada, as you can say, back in the 60s, he's pushing for this. This is what he's trying to present to the world. He's trying to present a completely new system of monarchy, a new system of rulership based on the ideal of the living entities who are seriously engaged in serving God properly. He formed a GBC, and so he understood also that also could be, if there's the lack of a single personalities, whatever, then there is cooperation between different individuals. That's also another system which he recommended, or which he practically implemented as well. The Varnashram system is like that. The Brahmanas on top who are glorified, then the administrators, and then the Vaishyas and the Shudras, and they all work conjointly to serve God, and therefore all the living entities are satisfied. So Prabhupada wanted this to happen. He wanted this to happen. He didn't just want this to be some sort of a theoretical glorification of something which went on in the past. That wasn't what he was hoping to achieve, because he is Paradukha Dukhi. He wants every living entity to be happy in this world. Now, there's seemingly so-called happiness going on by having your colour TV and a place by the sea and, a nice little semi-D and whatever, This is what is being presented as being happiness in this world. But it is Manu Dasa, or this other one whereby, it's a blind well. You're walking and suddenly you don't see that there's a well there and you fall into it. Well, this is the blind well of material existence, which is the material Western civilization. It's a blind well. You fall in there and you can't see, but you pretend you're kind of like you're in motion, going here, going there, performing activities, but you're just basically wasting your time. And the only you would say that the only way to get out of that is to take to spiritual life and understand who you are. The spiritual master is opening the eyes with a torchlight of knowledge. In fact, he's helping us get out of the dark well. In fact, and he's helping us getting over the ocean of material suffering. So, as servants of the servants of the servants of His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, we are trying to get some indication of how to do this, and we are hearing, as we said, I was reading the verse from the other day, Nivrita Tarshar Upagiyamana, in that we hear about the pastimes of Krishna, and that is the medicine for this Bhofoshyata. It's the medicine for the living entities who are in this world. So we need this medicine of hearing from Bhagavatam every day and glorifying Krishna, chanting Hare Krishna, and hence we will give up this material life and go back to the spiritual world. But while we're here, we will help ourselves and help others to do so. Okay, so that's the end of the class today. Thank you very much for listening. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, Srimad-Bhagavatam.